Morning, everyone.
Howdy.
Good morning.
And we're gonna have a good weekend.
Yeah.
I worked on the project, so
Yeah, didn't we all?
Good, frustrating, fun, all of it.
Well, with that in mind, I think we can get started. Do you all have? Can I get a thumbs up? Like, is my audio quality good today, or is it robot-y? Okay, good. Okay, still can't figure out why sometimes audio quality seems to go out, but we'll roll with it while it's working. A couple of things. So this is our week 3, and this is going to be our last week before break. So our 2 weeks following this are off, as I'm sure you all are well aware. Tim and I do have a plan that for what you all can be doing over break. So just want to put that on your radar. I think we will find some time later in the week to talk about that when it's a little bit more relevant. But just a heads up that we're not going to give you a project to work on during that time. And yeah, I think we can leave it there. Yeah, other housekeeping things. In terms of like the solo project, just want to encourage you all to like keep those questions coming. We got a couple over the weekend that were DM'd to us, and I think I would love to see conversations around the project continue in code help. And again, if there's anything that you need instructor clarification, please just tag us and we'll be happy to jump in there. I do want to reiterate from the last project that the most important thing is learning. So if there is like some slight different interpretation of a certain story, usually that won't be a big deal. The main thing we want to make sure is that you all are hitting the learning goals on the project. And I think that's about everything I wanted to talk about. Does anyone have any like housekeeping announcement things before we jump into class today? Talking about partials.
I got one thing.
Go for it, Ryan.
I got a kitten.
Awesome. Do you have?
Yeah.
Do we have
It's
visuals?
no, unfortunately not right now. I could get it in a few minutes. But
Well,
yeah.
you're obligated to do that. Maybe not during this class, but in time for next class.
All right.
Like
All right. How about the next palm? I'll go get if we have a palm.
It's a good compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Ryan. These are the level of announcements that we are looking for these Monday mornings. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about partials a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna do a lot of this class in Slack, kind of, and you'll see what I mean by that. But I'm gonna drop these questions in your main cohort channel, and I'll give you all a minute to read through those, and I'm gonna put you into some groups of 3 to talk about these. Now it looks like I've got one group of 4. Okay. I'm going to say 4 minutes. I'm going to give you all 4 minutes, and then we'll do a whole group discussion when you come back.
Yeah.
Hey, Tim.
What's happening?
We've got them in some breakout rooms doing some small group warm-up
Nice.
stuff.
Nice.
Yeah, I think just by the math, they're all here. I've got 7 rooms of 3 people, and then 1 room has 4. So that'd be 7 times 3 plus our extra 1.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Okay. Cool. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah,
That's
thanks
a
for that.
little bit late joining.
Yeah, no, you're good. With the here, let me.
Pop out of here in just a sec.
Baby.
All right, I'm going to mute everyone. All right, let's hear from some groups here. So I'm going to do some random cold calling here. Can't see what I'm doing. Alex, what did you all talk about for the first question? What does dry stand for? Why is dry code important?
Do not repeat yourself is what dry stands for. And it's important not only because it saves time and makes a more efficient code base, but it also creates like a easier to read code base for other developers to jump into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so readability is a big thing for repeating ourselves. If code is repeated like all over the place, that's just one more thing that we're going to have to read. Yeah. What about other thoughts? Like why else could dry code be important? That's great, Alex. I think there's a lot of reasons. Let's brainstorm. What other ideas do you all have? Gus, what do you think?
It helps with maintainability. So if you have the same code written in multiple places, if you have to change it, you have to change it in multiple places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I might say here is that oftentimes lazy programmers are good programmers. So when like we need to fix something, we want to make that fix as easy as possible. So if we only have one place where code is defined, well, if that code is broken or we need to update that code or change it, we know that one place where we have to change it. Perfect. Yeah. Other thoughts? Why is dry code important? V, what do you think?
I'm not sure if I made this up, but like, does it make it run faster if you don't repeat yourself? Like the program is lighter?
Not necessarily. So what you're pointing at is that there are some optimizations that we can make that are purely for us as developers. They just benefit us as developers. And there's some optimizations we can make that will benefit the people using our application. So when you say like, that'll make the code run faster, and I'm using the term optimization and for both of these, and I would say that's not necessarily right. Maybe I want to walk that back and use the term refactor. So there are some refactors in our code that we can make that will make it better for the people using it, the end users. There are some refactors we can make that will make it that will just benefit us as developers. So when we make refactors that improve the speed of our code, that make it run faster and just make the user experience better, typically we refer to those as optimizations. So we can make some optimizations to make the code run faster. When we talk about drying up code, we're not talking about optimizations. We're just talking about refactors. So I think the two that we covered so far are the main ones, so like maintainability and readability. Those are all things for us as developers. So it doesn't change how the code runs. It doesn't change how the code executes. We're just changing how the code is written. Let's go into the second question. So thinking about plain old Ruby, what are some strategies we can dry up code within a class? Let's hear from Grayson.
Breaking out all of your separate things into methods so that they can be called multiple times, called in loops and all of that, and just make everything interchangeable pretty much.
Yeah, within the class, I think that's probably the most common refactor we can make. We've got some code that appears in two different methods. So when we talk about code within a class, we're almost talking about the methods inside that class. That's the main thing that is inside a class. So we see duplicate code inside two methods. Well, let's pull that code out into a third method that we can reuse. Perfect. Thank you, Grayson. What about between classes? So we've got some code that's repeated across multiple behavior. There's some shared behavior. What are some tools you can use in Ruby to dry up those? Sam.
Strategies to drive code from multiple classes. We talk about two, inheritance and modules. And with modules, it's more so a parent class that are two child classes that are using essentially the same method. You could just toss it up to the parent and have it abstracted in a way that I guess it polymorphs depending on how it's being used in the child class. And module seems like it says cases where there are child classes from a different parent, from different parents that have to use the same module, or sorry, the same method. For me right now, I'm kind of having a tougher time distinguishing when to use inheritance over modules, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, and that's okay. I think inheritance and modules, especially for new programmers, very easy to confuse. Like when not confuse necessarily like how you use them, but when to use them is not always very clear. So that's okay. We don't need to dive too deep into that right now. But you're right that inheritance and modules are two ways that we can share code across classes. Specifically, what you're talking about, Sam, is that we're sharing methods. So if we define a method in a parent class, we can then call that in all the children class. Similarly, if we define a method in a module, we can call that method in any class that includes that module. Does anyone have any other thoughts? So I would say like those are the two, those are probably the two like most technically advanced concepts that I would say that you can use. There's another simpler solution that I'm looking for as well. So I've got two classes. There's some shared behavior between the two. What's another option that I could do to drive these classes? Max.
I mean, theoretically, you could make them one class.
You could make them one class, but let's say that they have to do two different things. So we have to keep those two separate classes. But so in the same way, when we think about like methods, I've got method A, method B, and there's some repeated code between the two. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the repeated code into its own method. How could we apply that similar principle to classes? Ryan, what do you think?
I would use inheritance or even maybe just a function, a global function just outside, but that'd probably be a bad idea. But inheritance would be my go-to, but I'm not sure if there's a simpler way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kind of what I'm getting at here is similar to inheritance, but not exactly inheritance, to where if you have, in the same way when we have like two methods and we can make a third method, when it comes to classes, you can make a third class. So I've got like class A and class B. If there's repeated code between them, I can do inheritance. I would say that's probably the most complicated way of doing it, but you can also make a third class and then call upon that class inside another class. So you can just make more classes to compose that repeated code. I would say that is more of the, if I'm using the technical terms, it's maybe more of a composition style of refactoring. So inheritance is a relationship, the thing that inherits from when you have a parent-child, you would say the child is a parent. So it is the same thing as the parent, and it also does other stuff on top of that. I could write a class where one of my classes contains another class. I'll try and give you an example. So say I have two different stores. So say I have like a class for an office supply store, and I have a class for a bakery. and they share some repeated code to ship their packages. Well, maybe what I do is I make a third class called package shipper or package shipment or shipping department or something like that. And that I pull the repeated code into that class, and I use that class within both my my cake store, my bakery store, whatever, and my office supply store. That would be an example. Sydney?
Sorry, I just got a little confused. So you're saying, okay, are bakery and office supply, like, would that be like there? Okay, I'm getting confused in my head. I'm sorry. Because why
That's
couldn't
okay.
you just call, like, instead of creating this third class, because then the methods that live in that class, can't you only call those methods on instances of that class?
Yeah. So what I might have to do inside my other classes is I might have to make an instance in order to use my, like, if I define like a shipment department class, then I might have to instantiate a shipment department in order to utilize it in that other class.
Then could you, then why wouldn't you just have bakeries know about office? I know that doesn't make sense, but like, why wouldn't you have them know about each other and just cut out that third class?
Yeah, so if the code defined for like shipping something is repeated between the two, that's the reason why, is because we're trying to dry up the code for the reasons we stated earlier. Given what you're saying, another potential solution is we could remove the repeated code from one class and just utilize the other class, only define it in that one class. But then that might not make very much sense to include like the department store within the bakery store. So anyway, this is okay if this is not like making as concrete, like if you can't quite imagine this as like a concrete example, that's okay. I just want us to kind of like as developers to just take stock of what's in our tool belt. So we've got all these, when we know as developers, when we identify repeated code, we want to fix it. Repeated code is not good to have in our code base. And so some of the things we can do in Ruby are we can make new classes, new methods, we can inherit methods, we can include modules, or sorry, we can inherit classes, we can include modules, we can do all these things. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add another tool into our tool belt. We're going to add another tool for taking out that repeated code. So today, specifically, what we're gonna implement is we're gonna implement partials, which are gonna help us remove repeated code from our views specifically. So today we're really like trying to think about our views, our ERB files and the code within those and how we can drive those up. So our answer is gonna be partials. And that is, yeah, I think that's about it that I wanted to talk about for this morning. So I really, before we do an activity. So I really do want to make this connection between what we're doing today when we're implementing partials is we're applying those same exact principles that we've learned already as programmers. Dry code, we always want to have dry code. So this applies to our partials. This doesn't matter if you're doing Heroku, you want to dry things up on your Heroku side, you wouldn't want repeated scripts. So that is just to say, like, all the things that we're doing as developers, these are principles that you should apply throughout your career. Let me drop the activity into the channel for you all to look at, and then we'll go ahead and talk about it a little bit. Okay, so I've dropped that message into your main cohort channel, and I do want to talk through it together. So what I want you all to do for the next 45 minutes is I want you to do a little bit of solo work time, choose your own adventure, and we're gonna come back together towards the end of this class time. I think around, what's 45 minutes from now, like 10:15? Yeah, something like 10:15, and we're gonna go over this together. But I do want you working solo, and specifically, like, I want to focus a little bit on the the process of what we're doing today. So, you know, I think with a lot of classes, we give you like here's exactly what you should be doing. And I want you to kind of like advocate for yourself a little bit this morning to do what is going to be most beneficial for you during this time. So I've given you a choice of 2 activities. It says work individually for 45 minutes. I do want you to take one 45-minute POM. So that's in terms of like process things. I think that's something that we can focus on, like make it a goal that you take a POM. And if you need to set a timer for yourself, then do that. So my goal for you all is by the end of this 45-minute work time that you have successfully implemented a partial. I've given you a couple different options of how you can go about doing that, but everyone should have that done by the end of the 45 minutes. So that's your goal there. I do have a note in here about a productive struggle. So pay attention to when you are in unproductive struggle. We haven't used this term unproductive struggle this mod with this cohort, but I do want to talk about it very briefly. So unproductive struggle to me is when you are like working on something and you're not making any progress on it. And additionally, I think you don't necessarily have like a direction that you're trying to go. So you're kind of just trying to like throw, it's like the feeling of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and just praying that something works. And that's not always the best way to go about our work. So we want to get out of that unproductive struggle and into productive struggle. And the tip that I have for doing that this morning is to make sure that you are using your resources. So if you at any point during this morning like are stuck and you don't know how to move forward, the lesson plan is going to be a really good resource. The Rails docs are going to be a really good resource. And then me, your instructor, and your classmates are going to be really good resources as well. So at the end of the work time, we're going to come together and we're going to do a small group share. During that small group share, my focus is going to have us use technical language. So I'll talk about this again when we come back together, but I do have some technical terms there that I want you all to be using. In terms of your 2 activities, I think they're a little bit out of order here, but they're the choices are implement partials in your project and refactor set list. So implement partials in your project, I would say like that's what I want you to do if you are feeling good about this concept, if you generally like feel good about your views and executing Ruby code inside your views. I have linked the Rails guides in both of these activities for reference. So if you want to, I'll share my screen for this part. So if you want to look at this, this will take you to using partials, and this will go over all this. If you want to read through this and you think like, oh yeah, that's pretty straightforward, I can do that in my project, I would say like do that. That would be pushing yourself a little bit more. If you read through this and you're like, I'm not so sure about this, I'll give it a shot, but I'm not too sure if I'm going to be able to do this or not. If you're a little bit hesitant, that's fine. What I want you to do is I want you to work on doing it in setlist. And so I have here refactor setlist, dry up your views using partials. The many-to-many or the main branches of setlist are going to have your the up-to-date code that you should be working off of. So if you get into Git trouble, you can just clone down a fresh copy of that repo and work off the main branch. That should be fine. And it links the same Rails guides there in reference. So the big difference between working on the project right now and working on setlist is that the setlist, we've got the lesson plan to fall back on. So the lesson plan is going to work you through refactoring artists, the edit and the new form, which is inside of that repo. And so you have the opportunity to give it a try yourself. And if you can't quite get it to work just by referencing the documentation, then you can use the lesson plan. So I want everybody at least to start by referencing the documentation and trying to read the documentation. So this is another thing as professional developers, you don't always have like a lesson plan to fall back on. You don't always have a tutorial to fall back on. So really try and push yourself to use that technical documentation and understand that before you look through the lesson plan. Okay, so just to recap, work on the project. If you're feeling good about this, you can, there are, so I have 2 suggestions for you. If you do want to work on the project, you can use a partial for the form to start an application. And then my other tip here is if you if you're trying to find another place to use a partial, oftentimes it's good to just use these in those like monster views, the views that just get very, very big. You can use this to break down your views. So implement partials in your project if you're feeling particularly good with this. If you want to maybe move a little bit slower, have that like fallback of the lesson plan, work on set list. And when we come back together, I'll put you in groups based on what you work on, and we're going to do code share with those people. Okay. Any questions, anything I can clarify before I let you all go? Oh, and by the way, I do want to, I'll leave the Zoom room open so you all can go off and work, and you can stay in here if you want, or you can leave and you can always come back if you have any questions. Anything coming up for y'all? All right, if there's nothing else, go ahead and get started working. We're gonna come back together at 10:15 to do some code share.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah.
I have a question on embedded Ruby. And if you can do like an if statement, whether or not to show embedded Ruby or to like have a partial, is that possible?
Definitely, and that's a good use case for a partial. Yeah, so I might want to, just to make my views really simple, I could say like if blah blah blah, show this view, if blah 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 this view. So for instance, like if someone is an admin, show them the admin view, or if they're a regular user, show them this view. Yeah, it's a good use case. And the ERB tags, ERB stands for embedded Ruby, so really think of it as any Ruby. You can run any Ruby in there, including if statements.
Gotcha. So how would you like say, I'm trying to fit it to an application form, but like, I don't know, if this is application number 5, then show this is application number 5, just that simple. And would you do that from the view or would you do that from the controller?
I would do that in the view. Yeah, so that's a good example of presentation. And then to the first part, how would you do that if this is order 5, show order 5 or something?
Or I guess more along the lines of, so I'm thinking of like when you have your search to search for pets to add to your application. If the application is submitted, you don't want to have that anymore.
Yes.
So like you would say if in progress, render search.
Yeah, you've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I would do that, and that's a very good use case for partials. Yeah, because this view that you're describing, it can take, based on the user stories, it can take on different forms depending on different states in our application.
Gotcha. What would the syntax look like? Is that, should I be doing it as a one line Like Ruby syntax?
It can be a one-liner. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think try and see if you can get that to work in your, I think that would be a good like stretch thing to work on in this work time. Yeah, I don't want to tell you exactly how to do it, but I think that you can manage to do it. The important thing is to remember that the ERB tags, you're running just Ruby code, and the so when you look at the Rails docs and you see this view code, look at it as Ruby methods. So for example, the render call, that is a method that we're passing arguments to. So you can combine that with your knowledge of Ruby and how to use if statements.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's up?
I just have a quick question, kind of unrelated to partials, but just for the project as a whole.
Sure.
The within blocks, is that kind of like we should be using that wherever possible for our testing?
It's a good idea most of the time to use within blocks. Usually if you just have an expect page to have content, that's a pretty light assertion to just say like this entire web page. So if our view is maybe not complex, but if it's like an actual view, usually an actual view, unlike set list where we've got like very short views, usually our actual views in our application have a lot going on. And so we want to use withins to target whatever specific part of the page we're expecting content to appear.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then one more thing off of that. I know there's like, there's like a class and then like section ID. I know one of them takes precedent over the other. Do you remember what that order is? Is it like class and then ID?
Yes, if you're talking about CSS selectors, the order is ID, then class, then element.
Okay.
And there's like a whole list of rules. If you look in that testing best practices lesson, or sorry, I think it's actually HTML and CSS that I had you look through. It goes over like, there's a way to calculate it, but the three that you need to know are like the ID, the class, and then just like selecting an element.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
I'll take a look into those. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Brian, I have a question on testing also.
Sure.
I know in Mod 1, we were doing very much test-driven development. Is that the same here, that we should be writing tests before writing like any models or features?
Yeah, ideally that's what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the one thing to note is that now in Mod 2, now that we have two different types of testing, now that we have model and feature tests, there are TDD can look a little bit different depending on what you choose to start with. So for me, like a lot of times I'll focus on the models before I implement something in a feature. And I might say that's like a bottom up way of doing TDD. And some people prefer to start with the feature, think about it from the user's perspective, and then work down to what needs to happen at the model level, which would be referred to as top down.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry, one other question on partials. Did you really want us to do like render partial, or are you okay with just us like rendering a form? And does that count as a partial, or is it distinctive to like a part of that other file? Does that make any sense?
Not entirely. I don't know if I understand the distinction between use a partial and render a form.
Okay. So I think from what I've been getting that the documentation hasn't referred to just a straight render as a partial. It's saying if you only take part of a render, or if you pass something through it, then that is a partial. But I could be misreading that.
Could you share your screen just so I can see
Sure.
part of the documentation you're referencing?
Should be over here. So, I guess, let me see.
Yeah, so I think with all of these, I think you're still utilizing partials.
Okay.
Can you scroll back up a little bit to yeah, these should all be yeah, these are all of these like render versions make use of partials. So
Okay, so even if it's just this, that's still okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Where's this?
All right, welcome back. Can I'd like to do some polling to start with, so that I can get people into to the right rooms. So let's do this. Can I get a green check mark if you spent your time working on the set list app? Perfect. All right. This will be great. All right. So once again, green check mark if you spent your time working on the set list app. Let me make some groups here. Okay. I'm going to clear all of these. Can I get you all to can I get a green check mark if you spent your time working on the project? Okay. All right, so I think that was a good start on this. Let me, I'm gonna drop in some questions for you all to talk about. So I'm gonna put you all into some small groups, and I'm planning on opening these rooms up for 20 minutes. But we'll just kind of like go up until around 11. And I think probably what will happen is I will bring the group back together if I see things that I think we should talk about together, or I'll just leave you in your code share groups if I see everything's going on. And as I let you, after I let you go out into your groups, please use the ask for help button if you need anything. And if I don't come immediately, I'll get to it when I can. But yeah, I did drop some questions for you in the cohort channel. So first thing, just want you to take it notice, like, did you take your POM? Why do you think that is? Or why didn't you take it? If you are successful implementing the partial, I want you all to share, either way, I want you all to share what you did with the group. And if you were successful, I want you to describe your code, and I want you to focus on using technical terms. And group members, you can keep your group mates accountable. So try to use the terms method, argument, local variable, instance variable, return, symbol, string, HTTP verb, HTML. There is an opportunity to use all of these terms within these tasks. And if you can't think of one, that's a great if you can't figure out how to use one of these terms, that's a good thing to discuss with your group. If you weren't quite able to get something working, I'd like for you all to, as a group, see if you can get it working. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions before I open up your groups? Questions on what you should be doing? All right. If anything comes up, just let me know. And then right now I have unassigned Catherine, Isabel, and Gus. What did you all work on during the solo work time?
Set list.
Set list for Isabel.
Yeah, I did set list and worked a little bit on my project.
Gotcha. And then Catherine, what about you?
Yeah, I worked on set list as well.
Gotcha. Catherine, just a heads up, your audio is a little robot-y for me.
Sure. Switch back to my computer. Is that a little bit better?
That one's better.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I'm gonna try and put you all, I'm just gonna put you all in a group together then.
Cool, thanks.
Where it says form tag path, does this mean any path or it should say path? Like
Sorry,
wherever
can you
you
share?
want. Yep.
I
Sure
think
can.
for that it's just
Criteria. So like that I'm really interested on because that would definitely help with what I'm struggling on in the project to this point.
Brian, on that note, I've seen people use the partials. So as we move through the application show page, how it changes, people are using partials to show a different show display, but that doesn't seem to follow the principle of dry code of how you've introduced partials here in the lesson. Would that be like a feasible way to implement partials, or would you recommend going elsewhere? The first thought that comes to my mind of still having the same functionality of showing a different show display without using partials would be like a nested if statement that would be relative to, like it would show a certain display relative to a param to indicate where it is in the process.
Yeah, so I think you're right that implementation of partials doesn't necessarily dry up code, right? But that doesn't mean that it's a bad approach. So I think that's kind of like my note. If you look in at one of my notes for setting up the activity, it was they can also be used to just like clean up some of your messy views, and that's kind of like that's what I was getting at is like this application like work page. There's this application show page that just gets really complicated, and it can show different things at different times. So yeah, a partial is a good use case for that. And I would say that you have to combine the two things that you're talking about. I think you have to combine if statements for showing certain types of things in your views with partials to like simplify the views. That's, I think, would be that's what I would recommend that you all do in your project.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Did I answer all your questions?
Yeah, you hit it.
Okay.
All in point, yeah. Robert and Megan, do you have any? I think I just hogged the floor.
I'll let you all go for now, and if anything comes up, just let me know. I can come back for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Rendering that.
What is the argument in that situation?
The argument that I'm passing in is song.
So the argument is the local variable.
Yeah, like for my partial, I have a local variable called song, and so I have to supply that somehow in the locals hash here. So what are our keywords we should be using? Because I'm not even looking at the
logic for some of this yet, but
that part took me so long yesterday.
Are you still seeing my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. The green bar.
I think your approach, and this is kind of something that I've been thinking about doing, but I think now I'm seeing how you've kind of done it. It's definitely a lot cleaner, like breaking them out into different partials, the different sections, and then just calling those, as opposed to where I'm almost using like an argument for the same partial, and then it doesn't really clean up the code. It's all still in one place.
Sorry, kind of my thought there was like, I didn't implement partials until I had to go build the admin, like I called like the portal to like go review an application. That's when I realized like, oh, partials make sense to dry out code here. And that's where like, oh, how can I take chunks that need to appear on both pages and like create from there.
But what is actually being readable on the screen changes. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've been using that for just like, it's just like with underscores, I think it automatically changes it, but I've been using that to make it look a little better.
Nice.
Can create a new shelter. That should work. I don't understand why you're failing. So, oh, that's why.
I meant to it to a partial essentially. So even this button text here, I replaced with something called button underscore text. So essentially, you're just manipulating what you turn into a variable here into a variable that you're assigning a value to here in terms of like the local variables. This locals here is going through the entire partial and looking for what to change or what to change out in terms of values, including like method being patch here versus in my new HTML. Oh, that's the wrong one. My new HTML.
Still unsure if we're going to get like a proper class on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brian, are we going to get a proper class on form with since you're here?
Yes. Yes, that is, we are planning on doing that after we get back from break. But with that being said, if it's something you want to start implementing now, I think that would be okay. But yeah, we're not going to explicitly teach it until next project.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. Anything else we can help us?
So kind of on that same subject then. So if for air partial, if we wanted to do a form with instead of a form tag, would that first line still be the same? The only thing you would be replacing would be the with, or would it be like a different syntax to pass it those values?
So the syntax would be the same because when you're rendering with this syntax you're talking about this syntax on the right two panes, like the syntax for rendering the partial?
No, I'm so sorry. On the left side.
Okay.
Yeah. On
Yes.
the partial, like the form HTML ERB.
So this, you're talking about the syntax of like this specific like ERB code right here?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you use a form with, what you're going to do is you're going to bind that form to an object. So typically the first argument to the form is an object that you are creating or updating or whatever you're trying to do. So rather than explicitly passing the path and the method here, what you would do instead is you would pass an object. So for example, I would pass this artist object and it would infer what the path and the method should be based on RESTful routing conventions. So that's kind of why like knowing REST, that's kind of why we haven't taught this to you yet, is because like there are two topics that you need to understand first, just like one, RESTful routing, and then number two, how do forms work? Then once we understand those two things, then we'll combine them together and make a form with a model.
Very cool. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Can I ask you all something real quick? How did you try the activity where you tried to describe this using those terms that I dropped you?
That's what
We
we're
had
doing.
started that and then we got sidetracked a little bit, but yeah.
So you got sidetracked. Did you find it like, why do you think you got sidetracked? Do you think it was difficult? Like, yeah.
No, we just went down the form with rabbit hole.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll let you all keep working then.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, welcome back, everybody. What I would like for us to do is to do the activity where we describe some of this code together. So I think that what I'm asking you to do by using some of this technical vocabulary is, some of this is definitely like new vocabulary that we talked about this mod. Some of it comes from mod 1. So I, as an instructor, I am not under the impression that because you went through mod 1 that we're never going to talk about Ruby again, right? So throughout your time at Turing, you're going to continue to iterate on some of these ideas that may be more familiar, or you might be more used to explaining in just raw Ruby, and maybe not so much in Rails. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and work through this together. I would love to get a volunteer. Let's stick in set list. So can I get a volunteer who implemented a partial in set list? Could you share your code with us, and we'll try and walk through some of these technical terms that I dropped and see if we can describe our code using those terms. So can I get a brave volunteer? V, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So let me open all of the things together. So this is the partial and new, and should do the, oh, here. So those three. Okay, do you want me to describe the things?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so this is a form partial. So here's we get a form tag, and then this, I believe this is a variable, I guess, or like a placeholder for a variable. I'm not super sure what I would call this.
So it's a variable. Do you know? So I've got two different types of variables listed. So I've got local and instance variable. Do you know which type of variable that would be?
I think this is an instance variable. No.
So not quite. So instance variables are the variables with the @ symbol in front of them.
Oh,
so
right,
when you have a variable that doesn't have @, that's going to be a local variable. So if I highlight on your screen here, this, and this all look like local variables. So it looks like we've got 3 local variables we're using inside this partial.
So then we have this local variable as a placeholder for the method that we will use on the other views. And then the same thing here for the name and the text field. And then this is creating a button, and the name of the button is going to change once we use the arguments in the views.
Great.
Okay, so then I'll do new first because it looks easier. So here we are rendering the partial name form, and we don't need to use the underscore here. But if I understand correctly, if I had created this in a different directory, we'll have to do the entire path here. And then those are like the arguments that I'm passing for the locals. So we're passing the path artist, method post, and the name of the button is going to be create artist. And for this one, it's the same thing, just the path is different because it's an edit. So you want to go to a specific artist page. The method is patch because it's updating, and the name of the button is update artist.
Nice, thank you. One thing to note whenever we make a refactor where we're trying to dry up code, a lot of times what we do is we end up reusing a method, and we just pass different arguments to that method. So in this case, we're reusing this render method, and we pass it different arguments in both our new and our edit. All of these arguments that we're passing are different based on what type of form we're trying to use. Okay, so that's pretty messy. I want to talk about these arguments a little bit more. So I'll ask this question, and V, feel free to answer it, or if you want to bump to a classmate. Just sticking on this edit form right here, what method are we calling, and how many arguments are we passing to that method?
I think that we're calling the method patch, and this is the HTTP verb. And then we are passing 3 arguments.
Gotcha. So that's very close. So this right here, and this is a good reason why we're doing this, because we're using the word method, but method in this context can actually mean two different things. So one, we've got the, as you correctly identified, the HTTP method I'm highlighting right there. So the HTTP method is patched. So once this form is submitted, when someone is like using our website and they click like submit this form, that creates a new HTTP request. And what we know about HTTP requests so far this mod is that they have a verb and a path that our Rails router is going to try to match. So the verb that we use, we've defined here as patch, and the path that we're going to use, we've defined here as path. Okay.
Oh, then the other method is probably form.
So that's not quite it either. Does anyone? Yeah, this is a tricky one. In this view right here, there's one method that we're gonna call. Let's go to Ryan. Ryan, what do you think it is?
Is it render is the method, and it's given two arguments, partial and locals. One is a string with form, and one is a hash.
Yes, that's exactly right. So the method that we're calling here is actually render. So if we look at this, this is an ERB tag. Inside ERB tags, we're executing Ruby code. So when we read Ruby code, this first thing right here, this indicates that we're calling a method. So we are calling a method render, and we separate arguments with a comma. So this comma right here is separating two arguments. Our first argument, just like Ryan said, is this partial thing. And our second argument is locals, and it's all this big hash that we're passing, that whole thing. So those are my two arguments that I'm passing to the render method that I've highlighted on the screen. So I'm passing two arguments, and I'll go ahead and ask this next question, which is, I think there's a couple different ways to answer this next question. But for each of these arguments, what type of argument are we passing? How are we passing those arguments? What data type are they? Can I get another volunteer? Max, go for it.
They look like they're both hashes. Is that right?
Yeah, they're both hashes, right? So we're using this hash syntax. We're passing a key of partial and a value of form in this case. And then over here, we're passing a key of locals, and the value is another hash. And inside that hash, we have key of path, value of locals. So yeah, in both cases, we're passing a hash. In the second case, we're passing a hash where the value is another hash.
Hey, Brian, is this like an exception thing that like you're calling this a hash, but it's not inside curly brackets? Is it because it's a render method and then it works like this? Or if I see this anywhere, I would still call it a hash?
Yeah, so anytime you see this notation of key : value, you are creating a hash. But when you create a hash like this and you pass it, so V, you correctly identified, well, how is this a hash if it is not wrapped in these curly braces? The reason is because this is a special type of hash, specifically that we're using as an argument. When you use a hash in this form as an argument, this is what's known as passing keyword arguments. So you're passing a keyword of partial with a value of form. So it is a hash, but it's more like a special hash called a keyword argument hash. Max, you have your hand up. Is that a question or is that from your answer?
Yes, it's a question. So in pretty much every other time we've called like any Ruby methods, we don't use the syntax with a space for arguments. We use like the parentheses. Is there a reason why render seems to exclusively use a space instead of parentheses?
Yeah, so let's demonstrate what you're talking about, Max. So V, can you make this a little smaller, the middle one, so we can look at the new? I think that one will be easier for us to look at. Okay, so V, can you run your test first? Oh, and we've got a edit spec line 11. We've got some, okay, we messed some syntax up. Oh, I think we need the open curly brace for our locals. Yeah, try that. Cool. So what I want to do is some red-green refactor. So our tests are green. So we can use these tests to check if our refactors work. So the first thing that I want to see is I want to see this go red to make sure that my tests are working. So V, can you in your new form, can you just like change that form to just like some gibberish or something just to mess it up? I want to see this. Yeah. And let's run our tests and make sure that they fail. So a failing test tells me that my test is working. It's catching when my code is messed up and I've done something wonky. So now V, let's put open parentheses around this method. So let's put an open parenthesis there and then a closed parenthesis at the end. There we go. And then we have to take out the space in between here. So when I say that render is a method, this is more the syntax that we're used to when we're calling a method. We call a method and we pass arguments with these parentheses. Okay, V, let's run those tests and make sure that that works. And that's it. Oh yeah, we've got to fix that thing we messed up. But notice we didn't get a syntax error. And there we go. So that will work. So Max, back to your question before of like render works with this syntax, and that's not true. So render is just a Ruby method, and like all Ruby methods, these parentheses are optional. So this version that we've made here and the previous version do exactly the same thing. You can always optionally put our parentheses around your method calls to if you would like. So one thing that I might suggest is if this idea seems like kind of weird to you that these view helpers that we're calling in ERB tags, those are Ruby methods, try and write them using the explicit parentheses to really emphasize that point to yourself that these are Ruby methods. And so now that I can see this with the parentheses syntax, to me, this is a little bit easier to see that this comma right here is separating our two arguments that we're passing to this render method. Max, does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up to that?
It does. Just one follow-up, which is kind of like why is this chosen here? Because it seems like Ruby, for the most part, sticks to a lot of conventions. So why is the convention with this render to have the space instead of the parentheses?
That is a different question. So why is the convention to not use parentheses? I think the reason is like I think the real answer is that Ruby is like very much a community-based language. And so I think a lot of things in Ruby are the result of the community kind of advocating for certain things, like Ruby forums are really big. And so I would say that the tendency to not use parentheses in the view is more of just like a convention that's developed over time. I don't know if you'll find anything in the Rails docs or anywhere that says this is how you should do it. I think this is just kind of like how Rails apps are made. This is more likely what you'll see in the wild without the parentheses. I think more often on the job, you might get some funny looks. Someone might say like, why are you using parentheses here? Those are optional, you can leave them off. So maybe one guess is that the tendency is to be less verbose. So just because the parentheses are more characters, we leave them off. That'd be my guess. Brian.
Just going back to, you said that this partial and locals, they're both hashes, right?
Yes.
Is this render receiving one giant hash? I just can't see the squiggly brackets around partial and the end. And then there's a second hash, like the path method and button text. That's a second hash nested inside of the first hash, right?
Yes.
So is render just having one argument then of a hash?
Not quite. It's still going to accept these as, so render still has two arguments here of one hash. Let me highlight them. So we've got one hash right here, And again, this is a special type of hash. This is a keyword argument hash. And then we've got a second hash right here, which is which is again a keyword argument hash where the key is locals. But then the thing that's weird about this is that the value of this hash is itself a sub hash. Now, what render does under the hood after it receives this argument, it very well might take all of these arguments and merge them together in one big hash. That's feasible that it does that. But based on what we are looking at on the screen right now, this is 2 arguments. What the render method does with those 2 arguments is up to it. It might make one hash after that, but at this point, they're 2 different hashes.
Okay. And sorry, just to restate, I'm just trying to figure out, like, right now we don't see those curly brackets. And so I was just wondering where, if they were to appear, you're saying that they would be before the partial and at the end of form and before locals and at the end of create artist after the nested hash, not one big one. So that's all I just wanted to figure out. Thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a nice experiment. V, can we try that? So let's wrap partial form this first hash in curly brackets. Yep, and let's do that same thing with that second hash that I'm talking about. Perfect, and let's run that and let's see what happens. What does that say? Undefined local variable method or path. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think what we'll have to do, can you take the parentheses just off the second one? So leave that first partial form in there. Oh, and then if you're going to do that, so what V's done is she's taken out, I said parentheses, that's right. So yeah, let's do this version. We'll need to put a space in right where you have your cursor. Yep. And let's run that and see if we get the same error. I think we probably will. Yeah, okay, so let's, on the second argument, let's take out the curly braces. Let's see what that does. Render part. Yeah, it does not like that syntax. I think it's treating it as a block now, which is weird. So I think this is actually, if you're gonna explicitly put those around there, V, can you put the parentheses back in? Yeah, I think if you're explicitly gonna use the hash syntax, and then you'd have to take out that space as well. It'll probably give you a syntax error still.
All right.
Yeah. So it doesn't love that. Yeah.
Brian, could we try one last one? Just the second curly bracket after form. Could you just delete it and then move it all the way to the end after create artist? V.
Oh yeah, so delete that one and then delete that one. And so now we just have one big hash.
Yeah, to see, so that second curly bracket after
yeah.
create artist, that's kind of what I was guessing, but
yes, I think you're right. I think this is more of what we're looking for.
But I don't think that was, you accidentally deleted the curly bracket in front of locals. You want to keep that one. So where you have path, not there, but right there. Yep. To the left of the P. And then you can remove that curly in front of the L. And you need a second curly to the right of create artist.
Oh yeah. One to close this one and then one to close that one.
Yes. Yep. And then try that. I doubt it'll work, but we'll see.
You know, I think that this is gonna work.
Oh, look at that. All right.
Yeah.
So that's where the syntactic sugar curly brackets would appear, I guess.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Ryan, for walking us through that. Because yes, this is what I was talking about before, where now we are passing you can look at this very much as we're passing a hash to this. But yeah, the one thing that this doesn't do is this is now passing this as a single argument. But the way that passing a hash works is it actually sees both partial and locals and treats that as two different inputs into our method.
Okay, so that's like fundamentally different. Cool, cool. All right.
Let's go. So we've got like 1 more minute here. I'm going to do this last one myself. So V, can you expand this form a little bit more? And let's just close out the edit for now. Okay, so what happens with this locals argument here is this locals argument is itself a hash like we identified. And what's going to happen when we pass this hash is that each of the keys from our hash is going to get transformed into a local variable that is passed to our partial that we're rendering on the left. So this syntax right here for all 3 of these is going to create these 3 local variables. So that is how we are able to call path and method and button text in our partial over here. So this syntax is creating local variables for us. Some other technical terms that I haven't quite used yet. So we discussed that render is a method. Every method that you have has a return value. So the return value of this render statement is going to be the HTML code that will appear in this view in place of this method call. So you can very much look at this method call as a temporary stand-in for the actual HTML that gets rendered by that partial that we're rendering right there. So the return value itself is going to be our rendered HTML. We talked about local variables, instance variables. So can you open up your edit HTML again? So the way that we create this local path variable when we're rendering is we make use of the @artist instance variable. So V, this is something that I mentioned when you first started sharing, but the way you identify these variables is that instance variables are always going to have that @ in front of us. So in this case, @artist is going to be our instance variable. And yeah, just to identify them, some symbols we have. So here's a symbol of patch. I know that because of my colon syntax. Here's a string. I know this is a string because of my quote syntax. Okay, so I think this is a good place for us to wrap up this morning. I am going to drop a form for you all to fill out for the class survey, and we will go ahead and wrap it up right here, and I'll let you all run to PD. So that link is in the calendar. Thank you all very much.